Welcome back to the Haven Homestead Podcast, where we learn and grow together on our way to living more sustainable lives. My name is Chris, and we are on episode 18. Today we're going to be talking about barter and currency a little bit. We're not going to get into any political discussions or anything like that. I'll leave the politics out of it. But we're going to be, just to understand barter, we're going to talk about currency a little bit, where it came from, and travel through time. And you'll see what I mean by travel through time. That's exciting. I like time travel. But in this case, we're just going to do it with our imaginations. Don't forget, you can find all of this information and all of our past episodes on our website, which is havenhomestead.com. Also, please head out to Patreon at patreon.com/havenhomestead. Patreon is spelled Patreon. And there is where you can support this podcast and the things we're doing here to help people live more sustainable lives. People like you and me and others that are interested in this responsible way of living. So let's get right into episode 18 here. So now we're going to travel back in time. So we're going to start here in the here and now, and we're going to do kind of like the time machine. He turns the time back a little bit and tries to save his fiancée, and then he keeps going back. So we're going to kind of go like that. So right now we're going to start in the here and now, and we're going to talk about plastic, meaning credit cards, debit cards, gift cards. It seems like the more we move towards plastic, the more we move away from paper money. And when I mean paper money, I don't just mean cash, but also checks or banknotes or traveler's checks, those sort of things. Those were how things were done before we had plastic. How things were paid for was always cash or check. And you go back a little further, before there was actually cash, people had banknotes where you would say, you'd write down a piece of paper, pay this person so much money from my account or something. And then they would go into the bank and they would give them the appropriate amount of gold coins, usually, I think, at that point. Which brings us to our next point. So we're going further back in time. Coins now. Coins were usually stamped with the emperor or king's face on it, and the value of the coin was the amount of precious metal that was there. So a copper coin was worth less than a silver coin, and a silver coin was worth less than a gold coin. And so you could change the value of the coin by how big or how small it was. That's kind of what we've patterned our money after, even though the penny is not really pure copper, and the dime is not pure silver, and the nickel is not pure nickel, but that's the way it was. That's the way it was originally, the coins were. And then we have just precious metals. So I was reading in a book about the Vikings when they were invading England. They always had armbands on to show their prowess in battle, and they were awarded armbands for good deeds, and which are pretty much like bracelets. And if anyone had a armband and they were at hard times, if they had several armbands, silver and gold and stuff like that, and if they fell on hard times, they could always take one of these bracelets apart and cut it up into pieces that they could use to pay for things with. And so that was kind of a way of storing your wealth on your body. And if you had a lot of arm rings or a lot of wealth, then you would bury it and hope that you lived to dig it back up. Other societies the Egyptians used rings made of certain precious metals, and they could pay for things with the ring right off their finger, and that way they would kind of also, like we do today, show some people it shows their wealth by how many rings they have and how big the diamonds on the rings are, and things like that. And they do the same sort of thing. A lot with the precious metals would also be precious stones and things like that, rare things that are of great value. Then before the precious metals, as far as I understand it, there were just goods. So I have milk and you have something else, and we'll trade a pot of milk for a dozen eggs or something, because I don't have any chickens. Something like that. And we'll get more into that because that is the way that I like to do the trade nowadays even. So there are 3 kinds of barter. The first kind of barter is goods for goods. So like the example I just gave of eggs for milk, or meat for vegetables, or whatever it is that you need and somebody else has, which is one of the problems with, is that they need to have something that you have, and as well as you need something that they have. So it has to go both ways. If I have something that you don't want, then you're not going to want to trade with me. And sometimes you can find a third person in there that you can do a 3-way trade, and that alleviates some of the issues from bartering. Some examples of goods for goods. I still make cutting boards, and I was making cutting boards a few years ago, and I heard on the radio that someone wanted to sell a goat, and they wanted $50 for it. So I took down the number. It was on the radio flea market that we have here at our local AM station, and I called the people up and asked them if they would like to trade a cutting board for a goat. And the guy, you could hear him in the background, "Hey Mom, do you want to trade a cutting board for the goat?" And he's, "All right, yep, she says she'll take a cutting board." And I explained to him, before, I think it was before he asked her about it or something, but I said they're made out of black walnut and maple, and told him the dimensions, and he says, "Yeah, okay, that sounds good." So we set up a time and went out to the house and got the goat and brought it back, and it was a good trade. That goat lived here and ate brush down for 3 years. So I feel that we really did a good trade there, and those guys, if they're taking care of their cutting board, is still doing just fine. I know the ones that I made for Lindsay before that, the first cutting board I made, we still have here, and it's doing great. So there's the value on both ends that are really useful. Also, another goods for good example is a seed swap. If you go to a workshop or some sort of gathering or meeting with other people that like to do gardening, whether that be vegetable or flower gardening or other outdoor planting things, food forests, that sort of thing, then you can always do a seed swap. And when you go to take seeds to a seed swap, make sure that you have fresh seeds that you take to swap, because your credibility can be lost very quickly. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in the sections of things to avoid. Another form of barter is goods for services. I can do something for you, and you give me something, a goods of some sort. Reading in the nickel, the thrifty nickel, which is classified ads, and somebody there said that they needed they had some sheep for sale. I think she said $75 a piece, and these were a year and a half old or something like that for ewes. And I called her up and I said, "I'd like to buy a sheep or two, and I want to butcher them." And she says, "Oh, I don't want you to butcher the ewes. That's kind of a waste of the ewes, because they, better to breed," which I agree, but we were just looking for meat. And she says, "Well, I have a couple wethers," which a wether is a neutered male goat, or a sheep. And she said, "I have a couple wethers. If you want to come butcher them or slaughter them and then take them to the butcher, then you can have one of them." So I went over to her house with my brother, and we slaughtered the 2 wethers and then took them to the butcher, and we got one in exchange. It was like 60 pounds of meat, and it was a few hours worth of work. I think that everyone was happy with that. She got her sheep butchered, and we got meat. Then the last kind of barter is services for services. These are the 3 that I could think of anyways. I'm sure there might be some other in the creative minds out there. Services for services, and I couldn't think of a lot of services for services that I've done, but say construction work for auto mechanic stuff. If you know how to build things, the other guy knows how to work on cars, that maybe you can trade. But my wife said, well, how about babysitting? So babysitting for babysitting. I'll watch your kids tonight if you watch my kids tomorrow night. I think that is a really good way of barter, and everyone's happy with that sort of services for services, as long as, and we'll just go to the things to be careful of. Make sure that you don't burn your bridges. And what I mean by that is, when you take your seeds to the seed swap, don't take seeds that are probably not viable because they're so old or dried up or whatever. Because when the people see that you bring bad seeds to swap meets, then they're not going to want to invite you back, and they're not going to want to trade with you. You'll be having, the next year you'll bring good seeds, or the next month or whatever when you guys are doing seed swap, you'll bring good seeds, and no one will give you the time of day because they know that last time you brought a bunch of garbage to the meet when they brought some of their best seeds from their favorite plants. Also, if you're going to trade babysitting for babysitting, do a good job. If you're going to trade garden work for vegetables, or whatever you're going to trade, make sure that you give it your utmost. When you're doing eggs for milk or something like that and you have the eggs, then give them a couple extra eggs. I know I've been to fruit stands before, and you say, I'd like a pound of cherries or 5 pounds of cherries, and the guy measures up 5 pounds of cherries and then grabs a big handful and throws it in the bag too. And it makes you want to go back and get more fruit from that person because they were willing to give you a little bit extra. And I really think that is essential in having a healthy trade system going on with you and the other person that's involved, or the other 2 people, if it needs a 3-way trade. So some of the arguments for barter is useful if you don't have any money, and that's what I like about it, is that you don't actually have to exchange your money. You can exchange your goods. So I think that's a really useful thing. You just have to make sure that when you go to trade whenever you go to barter, that what you take is worth something to the other person. And maybe if it's your last rabbit or your last dozen eggs, then you might feel that it's worth more to you, but you have to also realize that it's not worth any more to that person than if you had 15 dozen eggs. It's not going to change any value to that person that you're trading with. I hope I didn't lose anybody on that, but just make sure that it's valuable to both people. I also sometimes try to look for things that people have in abundance. So when it's plum season, if you go out and you want to trade something with somebody for plums, or here's a good service for goods, is you can say, I'll harvest 2 5-gallon buckets of plums if I can keep one. And that way that they are getting their plums harvested for free for a portion, and all you do is take a portion of the fruit with you. And I think that has a merit in itself. There was a guy talking about, it was on a podcast, and I don't remember who was doing it, whose podcast it was, but he was talking about going to a U-pick or a strawberry farm of some sort, and he says, he proposed the deal. How about I pick 5 flats and I keep one? For every 5 flats, I get to keep 1 flat. And the people were just fine with that because they got 4 flats for free. All they had to do was just give up a little bit of the produce, and it's probably didn't really mean that much to them, value or monetary wise. But to him, that's a next year's strawberry jam. So you have to really look into what the value is. And another argument for barter is in case there's some sort of collapse or grid down or something like that. And I'm not a fearmonger at all. I just say this is a reason for barter, is in case the money, the currency, is worthless, then you can use the barter as a way to still pass on goods, get what you need, and someone else can get what they need. Some of the issues about, some of the arguments against or issues with barter is, like I said earlier, both people need to need what the other person has. There's not a real common measure of value, because a rabbit to one person may be worth more or less than a rabbit to another person. And so that could be something against what the measure of value is. But I think that's what makes it interesting, is somebody who has a lot of rabbits, you can get a rabbit easier or for less than someone who doesn't have very many rabbits. So I kind of like that trade. Someone who's just swimming in milk is going to be willing to give you or trade cheaply a lot of milk for whatever it is that you need. Another one is you can't divide it up. So you can't just buy a leg of chicken if the person's only selling whole chickens, live chickens. I just want a drumstick, or I just want a breast meat off one of the. Well, you're gonna have to buy the whole chicken. Well, I don't have enough money, or I don't have enough trade items for a whole chicken. So that could be an issue. What I would suggest is you go in with somebody on that, and then you can both give your goods and then split it in half between the two of you. The last argument against is that it's difficult to store your wealth. So with money, cash money, you can go take it to the bank or take it to some sort of a safe or something like that. But if all of your goods are perishable, then a bad rainstorm and all of your wheat starts to mold or something could be devastating for your family. Or if there's a sickness, it gets your chickens or your cattle, whatever the situation is, it could be difficult and totally wipe you out, where his money doesn't ever get sick and it stays the same. I wouldn't say the same value, but it's easy to store. So make sure you don't burn any bridges with your trades. Make sure that your trade is worthwhile to both of you and honest to both of you. And I remember reading a story about a young man whose dad taught him about the value of honesty in trading, and they were living in the Old West, and they were trading with some Indians, and the guy had traded some hides, I think, some blankets for some hides, and the son, I think, was doing the trading between the two. And he came back to his dad and said, "Dad, look at these hides I got for 2 blankets or something." And the dad said, "Those hides are worth 4 blankets." And he had him take the other 2 blankets over to him and give them to him because it was worth that much. But he instilled in his son the honesty of making sure that you had a good trade. And then from then on, I don't remember if it said it in the story, but that those Indians knew that that guy would trade honestly with them, and I'm sure that they traded more in the future. There are a lot of modern day trades. We're long on time here, but I just want to say there's a lot of swap meets or flea markets. There are also bigger companies that do this sort of thing. One thing I do caution is that if you do a lot of trade, that the IRS is expecting their cut from what you trade for, and so make sure to be honest on your taxes and to claim if you do some trading. And I think that is it for barter. So I just thank you for coming along on our little travel through time. I know it was kind of lame, but from plastic to paper to coins to metals to goods. I think that we can learn a lot from what's happened, and also learn that we can get an honest day's wage for an honest day's labor, so to speak. Speaking of that, actually, with the trades. But speaking of that, actually, in the 1830s they had a time exchange, so you could work for 4 hours for one guy, and he would come work for 4 hours for you, and that way you could get, more things done if you worked for the community, I guess. And I don't know how. Maybe you worked for the time bank or something for a few days. You might be able to get a few guys to come out, and that way you could work together and put in your crop, using plows, and you help another guy put in his crop. And we do that informally today still. I help you, you help me. But this is kind of more of a formal, I'll help you for a day and you help me for a day. Now, if you are exchanging services for services, do, like I said about babysitting, and if you're doing carpentry or auto mechanic work or whatever, do your best. The last thing you want is that the labor, which is the goods that you're offering, is worthless because you don't do a good job or you dilly-dally. So just keep that in mind, and people will be willing to trade with you and help you out more. As a final note, I want to drive home, or just say again, that this is all about sustainable living. If we can make our communities to where we can be sustainable inside of our community, I can trade with you, you can trade with me, we can trade with that other guy, and we can build our communities, our relationships, our self-reliance, that we will build greater and stronger communities. And that's really what this is all about. So, this has been another edition of the Haven Homestead Podcast, where we learn and grow together on our way to living more sustainable lives. Thanks for listening.